comes time to consider, where we're PCSing to next, it's not just a, send us wherever you want. We have to have a conversation. Is it safe for us to go there? Is it safe for us to bring our 2 Black sons to that environment? Will their worth and value be challenged? Because, our job is to protect them. And so if that's something that's possible, then maybe we can't go there.
Right. These conversations are difficult, they're tough, but they are necessary. I mean, you have to be able to talk about this. Really, you have to, I think, more than talk about it, you got to be willing to listen to how our Black airmen feel about not just this situation, but how they feel in general.
You get better solutions in general. You get better solutions when you have diverse opinions, diverse backgrounds coming together to focus on a single problem. So put young people with old people, put folks who are from various backgrounds, infantry and armor and Navy and Marines and so on, but also people who come from diverse backgrounds, urban and rural, Black and white, Asian and Indian, and all kinds of different viewpoints come to solve a problem together.
While our military today is more diverse than ever, many defense communities are some of the least diverse places in the country. This means we're still asking our service members to live in some communities where they may not feel completely welcomed. This is wrong. We cannot and should not change the makeup of our communities, but we must commit to building tolerance and understanding. Without this commitment, we cannot truly support our military as communities and states, as organizations, or as individuals. I promised action, and today we begin an important initiative we are calling One Military, One Community, which is made possible through the support of Booz Allen Hamilton.
The initiative will advance this goal by focusing on 4 key actions. First, we will listen to those who have experienced the impact of racism and inequality to ground our efforts in their experience. Second, we will understand the issues of racism and inequality in military communities by synthesizing information gathered from listening sessions and working with defense communities to develop a strong analytical foundation. Third, we will plan for collective action in defense communities by creating roadmaps that can be implemented through community commitments to move the dialogue forward. And finally, the 4th action of the One Military, One Community initiative will focus on learning from each other to increase understanding and keep this conversation alive.
It's been great to see that people are willing to have the conversations. What I hope is that it's not a one-time conversation, and that it's not just a conversation. I hope that it's a conversation that leads to growth and it motivates people to educate themselves.
Good morning. Welcome to our special briefing on the Association of Defense Communities. The Association of Defense Communities' new report, Understanding Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Defense Communities. This report is being released as part of ADC's One Military, One Community initiative through support of Booz Allen Hamilton. My name is Tim Ford. I'm the CEO of ADC, and I'll be your host for today's discussion. We're excited to be sharing the results from this groundbreaking report this morning and discuss findings with a great panel. But before we dive in, it's my pleasure to welcome the president of ADC, Joe Driscoll, for some introductory comments. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Tim. Thank you very much. Late last summer, in response to the important conversations on race that were occurring around the country, ADC released a statement outlining our association's views on racism and inequality. We emphasize that it's important for all of us to do what we can to make sure our service members and their families can live in communities where they feel completely welcomed. This began an initiative within ADC that mirrored discussions in the military and in communities around the country. It was clear to us that the Department of Defense believed that addressing racism and inequality within the military was a top priority, and that we should mirror that priority by working with defense communities where more than 70% of our service members and their families live. With the support from Booz Allen Hamilton, we created this One Military, One Community initiative to continue our conversation and identify ways we can support our member communities as they consider how they can engage on these important topics locally. I want to emphasize that it is not our intent to tell communities what to do or really to define an agenda for them, but rather to give them the tools and the information they need to lead on this issue. Today's report, we think, is an important step in our overall process by providing an analytical framework for local communities that we hope will occur in conversations around the country. This report helps us build a foundation for change by helping all of us understand the issues and concerns that impact inclusion and diversity in our defense communities. I'm proud that the ADC Board of Directors is fully behind the recommendations presented in the report, and we look forward to advancing these important ideas in years ahead. I offer my great appreciation also to the team at Booz Allen Hamilton who led the effort and for the important report they're presenting today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining, and back to you, Tim.
Thanks, Joe. As Joe mentioned, one of the key elements of ADC's approach to this issue is listening to those who have experienced the impacts of racism and inequality and ground our efforts in their experiences. With this in mind, I wanted to start today's presentation with an opportunity for us all to listen by sharing some of the powerful comments that were shared as part of this survey. And I'll say, not all of them were supportive of diversity and inclusion. So while we'll dive into the data analysis here shortly, I think these comments really establish a human context for the complex issues of racism and inequality. As we wade through the politicalization of these issues, remembering the day-to-day impacts of racism can have on our military and military families is important. And at the same time, understanding how these conversations can create strong feelings and anger among some members of our community. We recognize that solving these issues is not simple and there is no single approach. But if we remind ourselves what at stake and how important it is to create welcoming communities, we can be that spark for encouraging meaningful change in defense communities around the country. We should never ask our service members and families to live somewhere where they don't feel welcome. It's now my pleasure to welcome two very smart researchers from Booz Allen Hamilton who led the development of this report, Kathleen Dippold and Connor Sexton. Morning to both of you, Connor and Kathleen.
Good morning. Thank you, Tim. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kathleen Dippold, and I am a member of the Booz Allen Pro Bono Technical Support Team that helped to develop the survey and survey findings with ADC. I am pleased to provide an overview of the One Military, One Community National Report. The One Military, One Community Defense Community Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Survey was developed to understand defense community member perspectives on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next slide, please. By defense community members, we mean military members, their families, veterans, military service branch and DoD civilians, National Guardsmen, and reservists living in communities that host military installations. ADC administered the survey between December 3rd, 2020 and January 8th, 2021. ADC asked its members to take the survey and distribute the survey along with nonprofit organizations, defense-related media outlets, and DoD-affiliated member groups disseminating the survey. In total, 1,726 individuals took the survey, providing information on their race and/or ethnicity. This briefing includes key qualitative findings from open-ended responses, including perspectives from active duty service members, veterans, military spouses and domestic partners, National Guardsmen and reservists, and military spouses and domestic partners. This briefing also includes quantitative findings from active duty service members, veterans, and military spouses and domestic partners, since these groups represented a large enough sample to analyze quantitatively by race and ethnicity. Before moving forward, it is important to note that this survey was not initiated or sponsored by the Department of Defense, and survey results do not represent the full population and cannot be used to make general conclusions about society as a whole. Next slide, please. As mentioned on the previous slide, the qualitative findings include 1,726 individuals. While respondents who identified their affiliation as National Guard, Reserves, DoD or Service Branch Civilian, or DoD dependent were not large enough to analyze quantitatively, these individuals, along with active duty service members, veterans, and military spouses or domestic partners, indicated education and government and policy as key areas to take action to make their community more equitable and inclusive. Next slide, please. The respondent demographics for the quantitative findings reflect 1,484 individuals who identified themselves as either active duty, veteran, or military spouse or domestic partner. Due to the amount of National Guardsmen, reservists, service, and DoD civilians and dependents who responded, the sample was not large enough to analyze quantitatively by race and ethnicity. Looking at the top left graphic, nearly 2/3 of the respondents ADC heard from were veterans, displayed in green, with the remainder being active duty service members and military spouses or domestic partners. White male veterans were the largest response demographic. Moving over to the top right graphic regarding race and ethnicity, the majority of respondents identified as white, shown in red, followed by Black or African American, Hispanic, and other race respondents. Respondents who identified as either Asian, Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander, multiracial, or American Indian or Alaska Native were collapsed and analyzed through the other race category due to small sample sizes. Now to the bottom left graphic regarding age. The majority of active duty service member and military spousal or domestic partner respondents were 19 to 40 years old, while the majority of veteran respondents were 40 years or older. Finally, on the bottom right, the graphic shows that most respondents live off installation and in the surrounding community, displayed in red, while active duty service members showed the highest proportion of individuals living on installation at over 1/3 of respondents shown in sage. Next, my colleague Connor will discuss the quantitative survey findings, which fall into 7 topic areas.
Thank you, Kathleen, and good morning, everyone. My name is Connor Sexton, and as a member of the Booz Allen Pro Bono Technical Support Team, I will brief the quantitative findings for the One Military, One Community National Report, which, as Kathleen mentioned, are organized into 7 topic areas. The survey findings provide an initial understanding of community members' sentiments toward DEI and analyzes how these perspectives differ between affiliation, DoD affiliation, race, and ethnicity. Now I will walk through how we defined each of these topic areas. To measure sense of community belonging, the survey asked respondents their perceptions on feeling welcomed in their community, their sense of belonging, and whether individuals in their community treat people with their racial and/or ethnic background fairly and equitably. Regarding community acceptance and support, the survey asked respondents their perceptions on their community as friendly, respectful, supportive, and welcoming. Community racial and ethnic inclusiveness asked whether respondents perceived their community as diverse, integrated, and anti-racist, meaning actively opposing racism and promoting racial tolerance. Also, respondents who had lived in their community for over 6 months were asked to identify the frequency in which they experienced discrimination in the past 6 months. Regarding community safety, the survey also asked how often in the past 6 months respondents felt concerned for their physical safety on and off installation, and whether they feel safe in their community. Touching upon barriers, the survey asked whether structural barriers cause inequity in youth education, healthcare, housing, employment, and law enforcement and criminal justice. ADC used outcomes in the Racial Equity Scorecard developed by the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, or GARE, which is a model to track equity metrics in communities. Additionally, the survey asked respondents whether they were satisfied with their level of involvement in DEI initiatives in their community. Finally, to shape and direct future DEI initiatives, The survey asked respondents which areas are most critical to address to eliminate inequity in their community, and what actions can be taken to make their community more equitable and inclusive. Next slide, please. First, community belonging. While most active duty service members, regardless of racial or ethnic background, felt a strong sense of belonging in their community, racial and ethnic minority, meaning Black or African American, Hispanic, and other race, veterans and military spouses or domestic partners, felt a weaker sense of belonging when compared to their white peers. When looking at veterans, the largest response group, white veterans indicated the highest sense of community belonging at 81%, shown in dark blue on the leftmost bar, and were nearly twice as likely as Black or African American veteran respondents to indicate a high sense of community belonging. Only half of veteran respondents who identified as another race indicated a high sense of community belonging, while about 2/3 of Hispanic veteran respondents felt the same. Regarding community acceptance and support, military spouses or domestic partners, irrespective of racial and/or ethnic background, perceived their communities to be less accepting and supportive compared to active duty service members who had high perceptions of community acceptance and support overall. Additionally, racial and/or ethnic minority veterans generally felt less acceptance and support from their community compared to white veterans. Next slide, please. The survey found that overall, active duty service members of each racial and/or ethnic background displayed consistently high perceptions of racial and ethnic inclusiveness in their communities. Hispanic military spouses or domestic partners felt the lowest sense of racial and ethnic inclusiveness in their communities. Additionally, Black or African American veterans and military spouses or domestic partners indicated greater frequency of discrimination compared to white, Hispanic, and other race respondents. The survey also found that active duty service members, veterans, and military spouses or domestic partners felt greater concern for their physical safety while off installation than on installation, but the degree to which respondents felt concern varied across different racial and/or ethnic backgrounds. Next slide, please. The survey asked respondents to indicate their perception of whether structural barriers in their community prevent equity in 5 areas: law enforcement and criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, and youth education. Structural barriers are laws, policies, systems, and norms that disadvantage certain people and make it harder for communities to be racially equitable. The survey found that across active duty service member, veteran, and military spousal or domestic partner respondents, Black or African American respondents, displayed in blue, indicated that structural barriers cause inequity in their communities to a greater extent than their white, Hispanic, and other race peers. Notably, at least 80% of Black or African American respondents identified law enforcement and criminal justice, employment, and housing as barriers to equity in their communities, which is roughly twice as many Black or African American than white respondents who are displayed in red. Additionally, nearly all Black or African American military spousal or domestic partner respondents believed that structural barriers in employment and law enforcement and criminal justice cause inequities in their community. Next slide, please. When indicating reasons prohibiting greater involvement in community DEI efforts, overall, at least a quarter of respondents across each racial and/or ethnic background indicated a desire to be more involved in DEI efforts in their community. Notably, Black or African American and other race respondents, displayed in blue and yellow respectively, indicated that they desire more information about ways to get involved and more opportunities to get involved. While white and Hispanic respondents, displayed in red and green respectively, shared the same sentiments, they indicated a desire for more information and opportunities for involvement to a lesser extent. Compared to active duty service members and veteran respondents, military spouses or domestic partners, regardless of racial and/or ethnic background, were more inclined to increase their level of involvement in community DEI efforts and desired more information about ways to get involved. Next slide, please. The survey asked respondents to identify the top areas to address to eliminate inequity in their community, allowing participants to select all areas that apply. Before delving into the findings for topic 7 by respondents' race and ethnicity, active duty service members, veteran, and military spousal or domestic partner respondents indicated that education and employment are key areas to creating racially equitable communities. Additionally, Black or African American active duty service members, indicated criminal justice as the top area to address compared to their veteran and military spouse or domestic partner peers, who indicated employment as the top area to address. Now shown on the slide by race and ethnicity, Black or African American respondents, displayed in blue, indicated top areas to address inequity to a greater extent than white, Hispanic, and other race respondents. While over 3/4 of Black or African American respondents indicated employment as the top area to address, white, Hispanic, and other race respondents indicated K-12 education as the top area to address to eliminate inequity in their communities. Now I will turn it back to Kathleen to discuss opportunities to explore based on survey findings.
Thank you, Connor. Given ADC's role as a connection point for various players within defense communities, ADC is uniquely positioned to facilitate efforts to improve DEI and racial equity in defense communities. Since ADC's goal is to ensure that defense communities are environments where all individuals can thrive, ADC is eager to bring together stakeholders from defense communities to foster a one community approach to addressing DEI challenges. As such, I will summarize opportunities for exploration in 3 different areas. First, community areas for exploration. Community leaders should work to understand DEI issues in individual communities by conducting annual or biannual local surveys and regularly conducting listening sessions to understand DEI issues in specific regions and inform solutions to local challenges. Also, community leaders should develop local strategies and roadmaps to address DEI by convening leaders from the military installation, local government agencies, and community organizations to define priorities, strategies, and measurable actions to address racial equity in a specific region. Next, ADC areas for exploration. ADC is exploring ways to connect stakeholders by offering to serve as a convener among military installations, community organizations, local governments, and other entities to enable a coordinated community response to increase inclusive excellence in defense communities. ADC will also consider facilitating information sharing through a DEI portal and developing resources to access via the DEI portal. And as ADC moves forward in overseeing sustained DEI efforts, ADC will consider establishing an advisory committee to ensure DEI initiatives are underway, recommend areas for future action, set measurable goals, and monitor progress towards those goals. Lastly, DoD areas for exploration. ADC recognizes DoD is taking large strides toward creating a diverse and inclusive environment within its force, and this survey does not attempt to address the scope of DoD's current DEI initiatives, as ADC is not privy to information about internal DoD plans, priorities, or activities. However, DoD may consider partnering with local community leaders to address DEI challenges to ensure that military families and veterans live in safe environments that promote well-being and a high quality of life. Additionally, DoD may consider whether the scope of the DoD Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation, Community Infrastructure Grants, which are designed to support community efforts that foster safe environments for service members and families to live, work, and play, could include local community DEI efforts, given that racial equity directly affects the resilience and quality of life for defense community members. Tim?
Thank you both. I mean, that was a lot of information, and there was a bunch of questions that popped in my head. I'm going to pause on the questions for right now because I want to make sure we get to our panel. I'm sure everyone's going to be interested in digging into this report in more detail. And as you heard from the research team and you saw from the team, we are really committed to transparency in this survey. So when you do see the report, you're going to see all our work. You're going to see a lot of data and how we got to these conclusions and these findings. So look, and we'll be sharing that link for the report at the very end of this broadcast, so you can take a look yourself. But for right now, I want to say thank you, Connor, Kathleen, and the entire Booz Allen team for your great work on this. This is truly a groundbreaking report, and we're so excited to be sharing it today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim.
Well, let's move on. To get a broader perspective on the report and the issues it addresses, it's my pleasure to welcome our esteemed panel. First and foremost, representing Maryland's 4th District in Congress, where he serves on the House Armed Services Committee and the Veterans Affairs, and has been a leading voice for Congress on the need to address racial inequality in our military and defense communities. A retired colonel in the U.S. Army, Representative Anthony Brown. Good morning, Congressman Brown. Our second guest, he currently serves as Senior Vice President of Military Community Development for Montgomery Area Chamber of Commerce, where he supports the viability and growth of Montgomery's military missions while leading new community-wide initiatives that fuel the regional economy and quality of life. He's a retired Brigadier General in the Air Force, where he held a number of leadership roles, including a tour as commander for the 42nd Air Base Wing at Maxwell Air Force Base. Trent Williams, welcome, Trent. Our next guest, he served in the United States Army for 23 years and retired as Command Sergeant Major with the distinction of serving as the Command Sergeant Major of the entire Army National Guard, where he's responsible for the health and welfare of over 368,000 Guardsmen and their families. He was the first African-American to be assigned as the Command Sergeant Major, serving on an interim basis to lead the enlisted forces during a challenging and changing time in leadership. Today, in addition to many community and professional endeavors, he serves on the Prince William Board of County Supervisors in Virginia. If you know, that's an area right outside DC, and he'll talk a little about the community there. And he's the first African-American to be elected to county leadership. It's my pleasure to welcome Supervisor Victor Angry. And last but not least, a military spouse for 10 years who held 6 jobs in that time, and through an impressive list of both professional experiences, including local government, communication, public affairs, she's been intimately involved with the community at each duty station. Her family are all people of color, through watching them and through her volunteer involvement in the military spouse program, she's witnessed firsthand how community outreach programs impact the success and failure for military families to thrive. Please welcome Andrea Atkins Hutchins. So good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning, Tim.
Well, we are very thankful for all of you being here today. I know you guys got an advanced copy of the report, so you had a chance to digest it, so people don't have to think you literally are reacting from the presentation. And there's a lot of information, and we've had some discussions beforehand, so you know you're coming at this discussion with some background on it. But to start our discussion, I want to go to what I mentioned at the start of the program, and that's the responses to the open-ended questions. Nearly half of our respondents included written responses to open-ended questions, sharing their personal experiences and perspectives. And sometimes it was very raw, and you'll see that in the report. What I wanted to start with all of you is how do they reflect your own experiences and your own, the things you went through, whether being in the military or being a spouse. Congressman Brown, let me start with you.
Sure. First of all, let me thank ADC for the outstanding work you do. And when I was Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, we worked together, particularly as we welcomed so many military families to Maryland in the 2005 round of the base realignment and closure. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity to work with you on these DE&I initiatives. And thanks for having me. The survey results are very much consistent with what I've been observing, both as a member of Congress looking at the military and military communities, and what I experienced when I was on active duty back in the 1980s, and then throughout my 30 years in the reserves. And for me, I think the starting point, and it's my starting point, not necessarily a starting point for everyone, because I think we need to come at it from different directions, is what are we doing within the military organization itself to lead by example, set the standards, promote the values of diversity and inclusion within the force, so that by leading through example, we can ensure that communities in which we operate, we live, we work and play are also promoting those values. So you got to kind of start within the gate, inside the gate, as you consider engaging stakeholders, communities, state policy makers, et cetera, outside of the gate. But the report, the findings were very much consistent with my experience, both when I was on active duty in the reserves and today what I observe in my work in Congress, working with the armed forces.
Thank you. Victor, your thoughts?
I really got to pick up where the congressman left off, because, you know, we're kind of sitting in a place where you haven't seen a lot of shift, a lot of movement, or we have seen a lot of movement, but it seems as if we're kind of spinning in a Groundhog Day circle, where just as we start moving the ball down the road, it's like it starts rolling back down the hill, and we end up back where we started, right? In so many senses. And to your point about the pointed questions or the pointed comments from some of the respondents, I was literally reliving some comments that I was like, man, I made those comments like 15 years ago, you know, and that's a little concerning, you know, that we have to figure out how to change that.
Thank you. Andrea, your thoughts?
So, you know, I'll just kind of echo, you know, I was not at all surprised by these findings. I mean, they are very indicative of actually what's going on in society right now. You know, we look at African-American females in the workforce, and, you know, they're currently unemployed at a rate double that of their peers. And we know that across the board, military spouses are unemployed at a rate that's about 3 times that of the national average. So when we take the things that are going on in society and we add, you know, military service to that and a pandemic, it really does just exacerbate everything that's going on. That being said, I really and truly feel like military communities are a great place to start addressing some of these issues. One, we have a captive audience, but 2, we really and truly do have a community of folks who, I realize some of the comments were a little bit negative in some regards, and some maybe didn't recognize that there was an issue. But I think across the board, military communities are probably the perfect place to start addressing some of these issues. And I think that there is a motivated audience looking to do so.
Great, good point. Trent, your thoughts?
You bet, Tim. Thank you and ADC for hosting this conversation. It's great to be part of the panel and for what Booz Allen is doing to address a very important issue. And so I would tell you, I think we have to understand that we all have different experiences, right? And so with those experiences come unconscious bias, right? So if you were to ask me about my experience here at Maxwell in Montgomery, Alabama, well, my experience was as the wing commander. And so, of course, it was probably different than some of the airmen that experience this environment, whether it's here or any other military community across this nation. And so the first thing is to really take the time to listen and learn and understand and ask those tough questions. You know, not just how can we make it better, but what is your number one frustration? It takes the bias out and it allows that person to share with us what their experience was like. And so I'm really excited that you guys are engaging in this issue. What struck me, I would agree with the other panelists. You know, fear of retaliation, fear of reprisal. I know something's wrong, but I'm not sure I want to engage because, you know, what it might mean to me, either as an individual or if you are in that leadership position. Oh gosh, how is that going to impact my career? And so we have got to get comfortable being uncomfortable, asking tough questions and listening to our people at a very grassroots level so we can understand their experiences. We can take action to resolve those issues.
Trent, I want to stay with you for just a minute. You come at this with such an interesting background. You're a former base commander, now a civic leader in the defense community. So you've seen, and as you mentioned, you've seen this sort of across the spectrum. What stood out in this report to you, and how does it reflect what you've seen over the course of your career in both the uniform and now as a community leader?
You bet. Thanks, Tim. This report indicates that it's about communication. It's about teamwork, partnership, collaboration. And so as a wing commander, you have a perspective, but what's most important is the perspective of the airmen that you lead, and not just the airmen, but their families and the spouses, to make sure that everyone is heard and everyone is represented. As we move forward, right, there are institutions in the community that want to help, they want to collaborate. So for example, you might look at the YMCA, and the YMCA addresses after school programs, pre-K, K-12. And so they're getting after education and after school programs. And so when you look at some of the things people said about education being important and housing and healthcare and policing, right? Look at this holistically and figure out how entities can complement each other to address the broader issue. No one institution can do it all by itself any more than one person can do it by themselves. So the key is that communication and collaboration, Tim.
Great. Andrea, I want to jump to you for a minute. While DoD and the services are taking steps to address racial inequality within the ranks, especially, as we see the Biden administration comes in, this report highlights the fact that racial disparities are perhaps even more of an issue outside the fence line. And further is that the families of our service members who feel these effects are often feeling them in a stronger sense than they do inside the fence line. From your perspective, living as in defense communities, being engaged with these communities, what more could be done to ensure that we are creating a supportive environment for our military families and our communities?
Sure. So, at the beginning of this webinar, one of the video clips that you shared was of Katie Hutchins talking about how she believed that it was extremely important that this was not a one-time conversation, that this was an ongoing conversation that ended up with, not only a continued conversation, but a legitimate support network. And so I truly think, Trent mentioned that there are a number of community organizations already out there and already active. But there really does need to be a sense of intentionality that comes from all of the community activities really focused on DEI engagements. We've seen over the past decade, maybe even two now, I'm going to age myself here, but we've seen over the last couple of decades that, veteran programs have really come a long way in the community. Military spouse programs, while relatively new, have really, mostly because of support of some of the folks who are represented here today, like Booz Allen Hamilton, they're really making strides and improvements within the community. And so I guess I'll give an example of what one defense community is doing while there are many. They're kind of, in my mind, the trendsetter, which is San Antonio. San Antonio is a community put together not only a task force, but they actually went so far as to hire somebody who was specifically focused on military spouse employment. And I bring that up because, it's an indicator of kind of putting your money where your mouth is. And I'm not saying that every community needs to go out and spend money on a program. But what I am saying is that without intentionality and without some sort of a direct path or goal, right, where there is either a financial or, even a verbal commitment behind it, we're not going to really see that improvement. And so I think maybe what I would just leave, or my final comment would just be, is that, communities in general, taking advantage of those programs like what Trent mentioned, they need to come together with the intentionality that this is a conversation that needs to be had. It needs to be open. And while it may be uncomfortable, it needs to be one that continues. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that point that you raised about the connection between employment and some of the issues of community belonging is something that we really need to explore, because I think there's a lot more there, and that may be a real driver of these issues. Congressman Brown, the report shows that our Black military community does not experience the same sense of belonging as their white counterparts. What do you see as the significant barriers to minority service members within the military? And what actions do you think Congress could take to address these?
Well, first, let me say, I think Andrea and Trent both hit the nail on the head in terms of intentionality. You've got to be very intentional in the policies, the practices, the goals that you set to promote the values of diversity and inclusion and ensure that all the men and women in our armed services, regardless of your race, ethnicity, gender, geography, have an opportunity to serve fully. What is alarming to me really is the lack of intentionality within the Department of Defense. I think it may be here today at this moment with, Commander-in-Chief Biden and Secretary Austin, and the fact that we're doing a stand down in the next 60 days to address issues of race. But we got to where we are today because of the lack of intention. Where are we? We've got a military that's 43% comprised of men and women of color, Black and brown. Yet when you look at the senior leadership in that same organization, the uniform leadership of the 41 four-star generals and admirals, there are only 2 African-American. generals. That's General Brown of the Air Force and General Garrett in the Army, and only one woman. Although real soon the Senate is going to confirm the second 4-star general woman. So that's exciting. But there are real obstacles, and sometimes it's rooted in implicit racial bias in selection boards for promotion, assignments, schools. And sometimes, although I think it's a small percentage, it's just outright racist attitudes and conduct. So what Congress is focused on, and what we are trying to do, is to give the department and the tools, the commanders, the tools they need to achieve greater diversity and inclusion. So we're mandating a mentor program designed for achieving diversity and inclusion in all career fields and throughout the rank structure. We've taken certain steps to remove implicit racial bias from the selection boards. We've commissioned a study to look at things like some of our elite forces, special operations, naval aviation, to ask the question, why do we have such a dearth of diversity, and what can we do to address it? So Congress recognizes the problem, recognizes that it's been decades in the making. We are now 70 years since Truman ordered the integration or the desegregation of the armed forces. So now we're giving commanders and the department the tools to really get after the problem, to be intentional, so that our force from top to bottom truly reflects America.
Great, and we appreciate your leadership on these issues. You're truly the right man at the right time to have in Congress and on the committee working these issues. Supervisor Angry, it seems like we've been talking about racial inequality for so long. And as this report seems to indicate, and you kind of hinted at, we still haven't made, we really haven't addressed many of these issues. What do we risk if we don't work to ensure those serving our country feel marginalized and unwelcome in our defense communities?
Well, I think the true answer there is we miss evolution. The greatest, gift that Americans give is the fact that when we work together, we can do so much, right? So we look for that greatness from all of us. And so if we don't go there, then we miss it. But I got to say this, Tim, I think a question really is, as we continue to do this, here's a question, I've just kind of been pondering. Is the problem the reality that we can never fully hold this, I'll call it the world peace that we want from everybody? In other words, should we have something that's always looking at this? I think the answer is yes, because it seems like if you think about my military career, 23 years, I've been out 10 years now. Wow, it don't seem like that. But let's just go to like 1990. Was the military in its greatest form then? And if it was, how did we lose that? Who took their eyes off the ball, the eyes off the prize, and then how did we end up back to where we are once again? So is it something that we need to literally do every, 2 years, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? I don't know, but because we keep kind of moving this thing right back around. That old saying, people don't like it anymore, but they'll term a Groundhog Day. And so like I said, when I keep hearing these comments, I realize, I'm out now. I've been out for 10 years. So these are our children now who are saying the same things we said when we were in, and we said the same things our parents said when they were in. And so when do we stop this cycle of not realizing, or whatever this is that's going on, that we have to address?
Great point. We are almost out of time, but I want to do a lightning round question here just to kind of wrap it up and wrap up this really great discussion. We've looked at this issue. There's a report about this issue. We Kathleen mentioned some areas to explore. I want each of you to, if there was one thing we could do as ADC or as a community or as DOD in the coming year to address this issue, what would that be? What would move, as Victor said, what would move that ball forward in a meaningful way? Trent, I'll start with you.
Great, thanks for the question, Tim. I think you're starting to do it, right? It's the listening sessions, but beyond listening, it's understanding, right? And understanding so that we can create, we can address issues to create that meaningful change. It has to be continuous. It's not a one-time, one and done. But I think your ability to help us as a military community stay focused on these issues, and then, as Andrea said, do it with intentionality, recognizing it's not going to be perfect at first, but we are going to continue to address this issue and hear from those that are most impacted, I think is how we can start to create some progress. But lastly, Tim, you have to be authentic and you got to be vulnerable, right? It's hard sometimes to say you don't know, but we're at a place where some folks just don't know what other people are experiencing. We've got to help them understand those experiences.
No, great point. Andrea, what's your one thing we could be doing?
So I think I'll add on to what Trent said, and I'm going to steal a little bit of your thunder, Victor, and talk a little bit about Groundhog's Day. You know, to your point, Victor, I do think that is an issue where we continue to come back to the table and discuss the same things over and over again. I don't know what the military looked like in the 90s. I can tell you, as you know, as long as I've been a military spouse employment has always been kind of one of those key indicators that we've looked at, not only for, you know, retention, for recruitment, and just the overall well-being of our military families. And so I think as ADC looks at moving this conversation forward, I think that is the key there, is to make sure that with intentionality that you are moving the conversation forward, and that it is not Groundhog's Day. It is not just convening those same group of people to sit in a room and talk, but it's really walking out of that room with a, okay, what now? And I think, you know, ADC stepping up to be that leader makes complete and total sense. So good luck with that.
And Andrea, someday we might all actually be back in rooms together too. So,
right? Yes.
Victor, what's your thought?
Mine is simple. I think it's the third person. I really need the person that is witnessing something that's going on between two parties, generally a Black person going through something where they experience something from another person. And oftentimes you try to address this yourself, but you get nowhere and it frustrates you. And we lost a lot of good service members in the military, not to death, to getting out, because they were so either bullied or just exhausted from trying to fight the good fight that they end up just getting out. I think the third person speaking up is something that needs to happen. Now, here's real quick, Tim. I feel like the youth today is really stepping up. I see more youth challenge their parents on bad decisions their parents are making, and it's the right thing to do, because this is actually great to see. It's like we're moving further, a little bit further than we were before, because our youth are getting involved, and they're getting involved not in a disruptive way, but they're actually challenging their parents when they realize they're making bad decisions and they're saying bad statements. And I think that third person viewpoint, it needs to happen more from us adults as well.
Great point. And you mentioned the differences in generation, I think is an important thing to look at. Congressman Brown, we'll let you wrap it up.
Sure. First of all, again, thanks to ADC for allowing me to participate in everything that you're doing. What I'd like to see, and I would encourage, is to pull that military leadership, not just the installation commander, but all leaders, all commanders, into the community, into the conversation about diversity and inclusion. And that commanders, I remember when I was a young commissioned officer and my troop had some issues with paying rent or whatever, I'd go to the bank, I'd go to the landlord, and I'd advocate for my troops. We've got to do the same thing when it comes to race, diversity, inclusion in the community. Commanders need to get off the installation, but in order to do that and do it effectively, again, we've got a model within the institution that we are promoting diversity and inclusion, and that we reflect that. So more engagement by commanders, all commanders, model diversity and inclusion in the ranks, and then advocate for that in the community.
Thank you, sir. And thank you again for your leadership. Our time is up, and we probably could talk about this all day, but hopefully we have opportunities to share and engage on these issues moving forward. I want to thank everyone who joined us today. This has been a great conversation and truly a great report. The report is now available on the ADC website. The link is on your screen. Feel free to download it, share it. This is really what we hope is the beginning of a conversation. And speaking of further conversations, ADC is launching a new program beginning this Thursday called ADC Live. This is a 1-hour live broadcast that's designed to bring the news and information on defense communities right to you in an engaging, interactive format. ADC Live is free. Just sign up at the website you see on your screen, and you can join us for this Thursday's show. We'll be broadcasting after Thursday every other week through May. That's this season, and hope to continue this in the future. This week's episode actually includes a look at one of the listening sessions that took place for this initiative in Northern Virginia. So we have a great report from that really would show you where this initiative is going next. Again, thank you all for joining us, and thank you to the great team at Booz Allen Hamilton for their technical support on this report and their support on our initiative overall. We thank everyone for joining us, and have a great day.
Thanks, Tim.